lessons from each of the crises that they undergo. And I'll be referring to the past two crises. I'll not be mentioning or going into the timelines as this is an informed audience. Um, Secondly, I'd like to talk about the doctrinal and the technological advancements. And finally, the political escalation of commitment, which actually I've borrowed from the conflict theory, the process of the entrenchment, as they call it. And then this is the final point that I'd like to make, and then move on to the CBMs. Okay, now India and Pakistan both draw different lessons from each of the crises. Here are a few examples. Post Balakot Rajouri strikes in 2019, India claimed that it had called Pakistan's bluff by attacking across the international border, implying Pakistan's nuclear deterrence had failed. What was the lesson that Pakistan sought? In Pakistani strategic circle, the lesson was that full spectrum deterrence, combining conventional nuclear options, successfully prevented India from pursuing its cold start land incursions in Pakistan. And there was a lot of literature that talked about it. And that QPQ plus, the response, it had enhanced Pakistan's conventional options in its full spectrum deterrence doctrine. And hence, India had not been able to climb up the escalation ladder. Furthermore, since India deployed its strategic submarines early in the crisis in Pulwama Balakot, Pakistani scholars also inferred that New Delhi's evolving playbook was seriously contemplating counterforce options, including preemption. In the 2025 crisis, these lessons diverged further. One lesson both sides drew from the last crisis was that each tried to calibrate escalation and each believed that it was successful in doing so. At the same time, both sides also saw the other's action as escalatory, and whereas their own as being proportional. So this is the nature of the differing lessons. In the last episode, both sides also crossed key thresholds by targeting each other's military bases, something that has never been tried in the past crisis. This, of course, does signal some sort of a new normal, either whether we like to accept it or not. And it also shows a willingness or a sort of a pressure under which each side is sort of testing and calibrating at what level to deal with provocations from the other side and how far to climb up the escalation ladder. Another pathway to escalation we see is the doctrinal evolution, inductions of platforms, and the fast-paced technological change that is happening. Recent Indian commentary and the reporting around Operation Sindoor and the subsequent official, semi-official narratives about refined, integrated response metrics, rapid coordinated long-range precision strikes across domains under integrated command structure is something that we need to look into going forward, right? There are also organizational changes that are happening in India, which would compress the timeframes even further. Movement towards integrated theater commands. Just late July, there was a statement that the CDS would have now have more authority in this regard. So this not only boosts India's conventional coercive options, but it also squeezes the escalatory timelines. Now, moving on, the recent crises also demonstrate development of dual-use platforms, technologies that favor first use, MRVing, canisterization. There has been a lot of talk of this yesterday. Autonomy, BMD shield, a nationwide BMD shield, even conventional counterforce options. The last test that India had conducted with a missile that can carry up to 7,000 kgs of weight, creating pressures for vertical proliferation like possible attacks on command and control, cyber attacks, C2 nodes, C4I, SIR implications, electronic warfare. Now, let me say that although these capabilities are still maturing, the talk of the preemptive options alters the perceptions and estimated red lines leading to the classical perceptual escalation. And this, I think, is an important point that we need to keep in mind. After the May 2025 crisis, some Indian analysts like Shashank Joshi in The Economist, he claimed He's the editor of The Economist, and he claimed that India wanted to demonstrate escalation dominance, signaling to Pakistan that it believes it can dominate and control any further rounds of escalation. The decision to send drones over Lahore and Karachi and to target explicitly military site represents a significant step up in the Indian campaign, he maintained. There were others who also claimed that if India could attack the Noor Khan air base with impunity, it could also target the Strategic Plans Division, which manages Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. Now, this false belief in escalation dominance, it erodes the fragile threshold of nuclear deterrence, at the same time pushing Pakistan to calibrate deterrence and give a notch-up response to deter further counterforce strike, which could compel Pakistan to move its alert levels to launch on warning or to further invest in early warning capabilities. These are the natural responses that any state could take in such circumstances. Although a successful disarming strike, let me say, is impossible, given hardening, mobility, dispersal, concealment, even undersea nuclear deterrence options, the perception of the responses could lead to an escalatory spiral, which is hard to choreograph. Finally, let me talk about some very important psychological roadblocks to de escalation. Now, I'll focus on only three key obstacles in this regard. And like I said earlier, this is what I draw from the conflict theory. Selective perception and the misinterpretation of intent. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, after the 2025 strike, claimed that Pakistan, in its bewilderment, did another cowardly act. Instead of supporting India's strike against terrorism, Pakistan started attacking India itself, and it was very popular. There were a lot of memes that were made on it as well. Similarly, there was another statement by Jay Shankar in which he claimed that India had informed Pakistan that it could stay out of it and choose not to respond. This is the kind of selective interpretation and misperception of intent that each party has of the other side, which can then lead into escalatory spirals. Then the second one that I want to talk about is self-entrapment and escalation of commitment. Leaders are often caught in escalation traps when backing down seems both politically as well as strategically impossible. Once the military action has been taken, they face the problem of sunk cost, which means that backing down appears costlier than sort of climbing up, even if the strategic risk is higher. After the, we could talk about Modi's statement where he's saying ke ghus ke marenge, and other statements when he's saying ke pani or khoon ikatthe nahi chal sakte, and those sort of hyperbolic statements. Finally, the role of information operations is something that I'd like to talk about. Information operations play a dual role in the South Asian crisis, and the pertinent role in terms of signaling and domestic legitimacy, but they also act as a serious roadblock to de-escalation. And if we were to look at the Pahalgam crisis, both sides flooded information space with claims of preemptive strikes, decisive retaliation, exaggerated battle damage. The narratives were aimed at multiple audiences, domestic, the public, obviously, and international observers, as well as the adversary. Now, the problem is that once the information operations are amplified, they shrink the political space for compromise. And climbing down the ladder is something that becomes very difficult. Finally, there's been a lot of talk of the kind of CBMs that could have been done in the 2 days that we've been sitting here. This is a very informed audience. I would not like to talk about the proposals that have already been there on the table. The SRR is one which is there on the table. There has to be outsourcing crisis management to third parties, I think, is a recipe for disaster in this region. Because sometimes they're interested. One day they're saying it's none of our business. The next day, they come in. We can't have this happen every time. So we need to have crisis management mechanisms within, amongst India and Pakistan. The other extra-regional parties who have interest could become a part of it. So these risk reduction centers, or whatever we might want to call them, are the need of the time. Now, we did see that cyber attacks is something that was witnessed during this, the latest crisis as well, this last. And so one thing that I'd like to propose is an agreement on the prohibition of cyber attacks, especially on the nuclear command and control of each other's nuclear installations. So there is already, we have a precedent of non-attack on each other's nuclear installations. Maybe we can talk about the cyber aspects of it as well, and the command and control nodes, and then reducing the misperception and selective framing through regulating the information flow, because I think that's very crucial if we want to have a whole of nation approach.